Good evening, and welcome to Truth Report. I'm Alex Truth, and tonight we are covering stories that cut right to the heart of human rights, government accountability, and corporate responsibility. From Tehran to Tirana to the courtrooms of Florida, the powerful are being confronted, and the consequences are reverberating across the globe.
I'm Maya Clarity, and this is the kind of broadcast where we don't just read the headlines, we dig beneath them. Tonight, we're asking hard questions. Why is Iran accelerating death sentences against its own citizens for the act of protesting? Why are Albanians so furious they're launching fireworks at their prime minister's office? And why did a federal judge just tell Tesla that $243 million in damages is exactly what accountability looks like?
These stories might seem disconnected at first glance. Iran, Albania, the United States. Different continents, different political systems. But Maya, when you pull the thread, a pattern emerges. In each case, ordinary people are pushing back against institutions that have failed them, and those institutions are responding in ways that reveal their true character.
That's exactly right. Whether it's a theocratic regime sentencing protesters to death, a democratic government facing citizens who have lost faith in the system, or a trillion-dollar corporation trying to dodge responsibility for a technology that killed someone, the question is the same. Who holds power accountable when power refuses to hold itself accountable?
So stay with us tonight, because these stories demand more than a passing glance. They demand investigation. Let's get into it.
We begin in Iran, where according to a report from Amnesty International, at least 30 people are now facing the death penalty in connection with mass protests. Death sentences have already been handed down in 8 of those cases. And among the 22 other cases still before the courts, at least 2 of the defendants were minors at the time of their alleged offenses. Let that sink in. Minors.
This reporting comes via the South China Morning Post, citing Amnesty International's findings directly. And what makes this especially chilling is the silence from Iran's own judiciary. The Iranian government has not officially confirmed any of these death sentences. That's not transparency. That's a regime executing its citizens in the shadows and hoping the world doesn't notice.
Let's put this in context, Alex. These protests erupted as a massive wave of civil unrest, with Iranians from all walks of life taking to the streets to demand fundamental rights and freedoms. We saw women removing their hijabs, workers joining strikes, students occupying universities. This was not a fringe movement. This was a broad-based uprising against a system that has repressed its people for decades.
And the regime's response has followed a familiar and deeply disturbing playbook. Mass arrests, forced confessions broadcast on state television, trials that human rights organizations have described as fundamentally unfair, lacking due process, and designed not to deliver justice but to deliver terror. When you sentence protesters to death, you are not administering law. You are sending a message to every other citizen who might consider raising their voice.
Amnesty International has been documenting this systematically, and their findings are damning. The trials have been conducted in revolutionary courts, which operate outside the norms of international legal standards. Defendants have reported being denied access to lawyers of their choosing. Some have described being tortured into making confessions. And the charges themselves, vague offenses like enmity against God and corruption on earth, carry mandatory death sentences under Iranian law.
Enmity against God. Think about what that charge means in practice. It means the state has given itself the authority to define dissent as a sin punishable by death. It means protesting for your rights, for women's rights, for economic justice, for basic dignity, is treated as a crime against the divine order. This is theocratic authoritarianism at its most lethal, and it is happening right now to at least 30 people whose names many of us will never know.
And the fact that minors are among those facing these charges is a violation of international law that cannot be overstated. The Convention on the Rights of the Child, which Iran has ratified, explicitly prohibits the death penalty for offenses committed by individuals under the age of 18. Yet Iran has consistently been one of the world's leading executors of juvenile offenders. This is not an aberration. This is a pattern.
So who benefits from this crackdown? The clerical establishment, the Revolutionary Guard, the security apparatus that has built its power on the suppression of dissent. Every execution, every death sentence, is designed to preserve a system that serves a narrow elite at the expense of 88 million Iranians. And the silence from the international community, the lack of meaningful consequences, only emboldens the regime.
That international silence is worth examining, Alex. While some Western governments have issued statements of concern and imposed targeted sanctions, the diplomatic response has been largely muted. Iran's strategic importance in regional geopolitics, its role in oil markets, its nuclear program, all of these create incentives for world powers to look the other way. And every time they do, the message to Tehran is clear. The cost of executing your own people is one we're willing to absorb.
And let's be honest about the information landscape here. The Misan news agency, which is linked to elements within the Iranian system, has reported on some of these cases, but independent journalism inside Iran has been systematically dismantled. Reporters are imprisoned, internet access is throttled or cut entirely during unrest, and foreign correspondents face severe restrictions. The fact that organizations like Amnesty can document even 30 cases suggests the true scope is almost certainly larger.
We should also note the human dimension behind these numbers. These are not abstractions. These are individuals, many of them young people in their 20s and 30s, who saw injustice and made the courageous decision to stand against it. They are teachers, students, workers, parents. And right now, they sit in cells awaiting a fate that the rest of the world has the power to influence, if it chooses to act.
The question is whether that choice will be made before it's too late.
Now we turn to Albania, where scenes of dramatic confrontation erupted in the capital city of Tirana. Protesters shot fireworks directly at the Prime Minister's office and threw petrol bombs as police moved in to confront the demonstrators. This reporting comes from Al Jazeera, and the footage is striking. This is not casual dissent. This is a population that has reached a breaking point.
Let's set the stage here. Albania has been gripped by intensifying protests driven by deep frustrations over governance, corruption allegations, and what many citizens see as an erosion of democratic institutions. The protests have drawn thousands into the streets, and the escalation to fireworks and petrol bombs signals a level of anger that goes far beyond policy disagreements.
What we're seeing in Tirana reflects a pattern that has emerged across multiple democracies in recent years. When citizens feel that the normal channels of accountability, elections, courts, parliament, free press, have been compromised or captured, they don't simply accept it. The social contract phrase, and the streets become the arena of last resort. Albania's protesters aren't just angry about one issue. They're angry about a system they believe no longer represents them.
And the government's response matters enormously here. When police confront protesters with force, when demonstrators are characterized as criminals or foreign agents rather than citizens exercising their rights, the cycle of escalation accelerates. We've seen this dynamic play out from Minsk to Santiago to Bangkok. The question for Albania is whether its democratic institutions are strong enough to absorb this pressure and channel it toward meaningful reform, or whether the confrontation will deepen.
The corruption dimension is critical, Alex. Albania has been engaged in a long and often frustrating process of judicial reform, partly driven by its aspirations to join the European Union. But many Albanians feel that reform has been superficial, that the same political networks continue to control economic opportunities, that public resources are siphoned off by connected insiders, and that the justice system remains selective in who it holds accountable.
This is what makes the fireworks at the Prime Minister's office image so potent. It's not just protest. It's a symbolic assault on the seat of power itself. These demonstrators are saying, in the most visceral terms possible, that they do not recognize the legitimacy of the authority housed in that building. That is a profound political statement, and it demands a response that goes beyond riot police and tear gas.
And let's talk about what's at stake for Europe more broadly. Albania's EU accession process has been a lengthy and contentious one, and the stability of its democratic institutions is a central concern. If Albania descends into prolonged political crisis, it complicates the European project in a region that already faces significant challenges, from the lingering tensions in the Western Balkans to the broader geopolitical competition playing out across southeastern Europe.
The people on those streets aren't thinking about EU accession frameworks, though. They're thinking about their daily reality. They're thinking about wages that don't keep up with costs, about opportunities that flow to the connected and bypass the qualified, about a political class that seems more interested in maintaining its position than in governing effectively. That's the fuel for the fire, literally in this case, and no amount of diplomatic language changes the fundamental grievance.
It's also worth noting the media environment. Independent journalism in Albania faces significant pressures, including political influence over major outlets, legal harassment of critical reporters, and an information ecosystem that is increasingly polarized. When people feel they can't get the truth from their media, when they feel the system is rigged from the courtroom to the newsroom, the streets become the only platform where their voice can be heard.
And to be clear, we're not endorsing petrol bombs. Political violence carries real risks and real consequences. But our job as journalists is to understand why people reach that point, and the answer in Albania, as in so many other places, is that democratic accountability has failed to deliver. When the system works, people don't need fireworks. They need ballots. And when the ballots stop working, the fireworks start.
The question now is whether Albanian leadership will read this moment correctly. Will they see this as a wake-up call that demands genuine engagement with the grievances driving people into the streets? Or will they see it as a security problem to be managed with force? History suggests the answer to that question will determine whether Albania moves toward stability or deeper crisis.
Now, to our third story tonight, and this one takes us from the streets to the courtroom, but the stakes are no less significant. A federal judge in Miami has rejected Tesla's attempt to overturn a $243 million jury verdict over a fatal autopilot crash in 2019. That's $250 million, and the judge, U.S. District Judge Beth Bloom, said the verdict stands. This reporting comes from Electrek, and it represents one of the most significant legal defeats Tesla has faced over its driver assistance technology.
Let's unpack what happened here. In 2019, a Tesla vehicle operating on autopilot was involved in a fatal crash in Florida. The family of the victim brought suit against Tesla, arguing that the autopilot system was defective and that Tesla had failed to adequately warn consumers about its limitations. A jury agreed, and they didn't just agree modestly. They returned a verdict of $243 million. That is a historic number, and it reflects the jury's assessment of not just the damage done, but the degree of corporate responsibility.
Tesla, predictably, moved to have the verdict thrown out. This is standard practice for large corporations facing major liability judgments. You challenge the verdict, you argue the jury was misled, you claim the damages are excessive. But Judge Bloom reviewed the record and said no. The evidence supported the verdict, and the damages were warranted. That's a federal judge, after careful deliberation, affirming that a jury of ordinary citizens got it right.
And this case does not exist in a vacuum. Tesla is facing a growing wave of lawsuits connected to its autopilot and so-called full self-driving technology. There are wrongful death cases, personal injury cases, and class action suits challenging Tesla's marketing practices. The central allegation across many of these cases is that Tesla has consistently overpromised on the capabilities of its driver assistance systems while underdelivering on safety.
This is where the investigative lens really matters. For years, Tesla and its CEO have used language that blurs the line between aspiration and reality. The term autopilot itself implies a level of autonomy that the system does not possess. Full self-driving is marketed as a premium feature, yet Tesla's own documentation acknowledges that it requires active driver supervision at all times. That gap between marketing and reality is not just misleading. According to this jury and this judge, it's lethal.
The $243 million figure is significant for another reason, Alex. Jury awards at this scale are designed not just to compensate victims, but to send a message. The legal term is punitive damages, and the message is clear. If your product kills someone because you prioritized hype over safety, the financial consequences will be severe enough to change your behavior. The question is whether Tesla will actually change, or whether it will treat this as a cost of doing business.
And that gets to a deeper issue about accountability in the tech industry. Tesla has cultivated an image of innovation and disruption, and it has leveraged that image to secure enormous market valuation and regulatory latitude. But innovation without accountability is not progress. It's recklessness. When a company sells a product that it knows has serious limitations, and someone dies as a result, that company should face consequences. This verdict says it will.
It's also worth examining the regulatory dimension. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration has investigated numerous crashes involving Tesla's autopilot system. There have been recalls, investigations, and public warnings. Yet the regulatory response has arguably been too slow and too deferential to a company that commands significant political and economic influence. When regulators fail to act decisively, the courts become the last line of defense for consumers. And in this case, the courts delivered.
Judge Bloom's ruling is particularly notable because it shuts down one of Tesla's key legal strategies, which is to argue that individual cases should be thrown out on procedural or evidentiary grounds rather than allowing juries to hear the full scope of evidence. By upholding this verdict, the judge has signaled to other courts and other juries that these cases have merit and that the evidence against Tesla is substantial enough to support very large awards.
The financial implications for Tesla are significant but manageable for a company of its size. $243 million is a rounding error on Tesla's balance sheet. The real impact is precedential. Every plaintiff's attorney in the country is now looking at this case and calculating the potential value of their own claims. Every family that has lost someone in an autopilot-related crash now has a roadmap to accountability. And every Tesla engineer who has raised internal concerns about the safety of these systems now has validation that the courts take those concerns seriously.
And let's not forget the person at the center of this case. Someone died. A real human being, with a family, with a life, got into a car that they were told could drive itself, and that car failed them in the most catastrophic way possible. $243 million doesn't bring that person back. But it does tell their family, and every other family in the same situation, that the legal system sees them. That matters.
It does. And it raises the fundamental question of corporate accountability in the age of artificial intelligence and autonomous systems. As these technologies become more prevalent, who bears responsibility when they fail? The user who trusted the marketing? The engineer who designed the system? The executive who approved the rollout? Or the company that profited from all of it? This verdict says the company. And that precedent will echo far beyond Tesla.
Now, Maya, let's step back and connect these three stories, because the through line is unmistakable. In Iran, the state is using its most extreme power, the power to kill, to suppress citizens who demanded their rights. In Albania, citizens are literally launching explosives at the seat of government because they've lost faith in democratic channels. And in a Florida courtroom, a judge has affirmed that one of the world's most powerful corporations must pay for a death that its technology caused.
The common thread is accountability, Alex, and more specifically, what happens when accountability breaks down. In Iran, there is no accountability. The regime acts with impunity, sentencing people to death in revolutionary courts that exist outside international legal norms, and the world largely watches. The cost of protest is your life, and the cost of execution is nothing.
In Albania, accountability is theoretically present but practically hollow. The democratic institutions exist on paper, but when citizens feel that elections don't change anything, that courts serve the powerful, that the media has been captured, then accountability becomes a fiction. And when accountability becomes fiction, the streets become the courtroom and fireworks become the verdict.
And in the Tesla case, accountability was actually delivered, but only because a family had the resources and the legal representation to fight one of the richest companies on earth through years of litigation all the way to a federal trial. That's not a system of accountability. That's a gauntlet. And for every family that makes it through, how many others give up, settle quietly, or never file suit at all?
This is the paradox of our moment. We live in an age of unprecedented information, unprecedented connectivity, unprecedented awareness of injustice. And yet the mechanisms of accountability, legal, political, institutional, are straining under the weight of the forces arrayed against them. Authoritarian regimes have sophisticated tools of repression. Democratic institutions are corroded by corruption and polarization. Corporations command resources that dwarf those of the citizens they serve.
And the people in these stories, the Iranian protesters facing execution, the Albanian demonstrators in the streets of Tirana, the family of the crash victim in Florida, they all share something. They all believed that the systems meant to protect them had failed. And they all, in different ways, demanded better. That is the story of our time. Not the failure itself, but the refusal to accept it.
What strikes me is the courage involved in each of these situations. In Iran, these protesters knew the risks. They had seen previous crackdowns, previous executions, previous cycles of repression. And they marched anyway. That is an extraordinary act of bravery, and the fact that 30 of them now face death for it is an indictment not just of the Iranian regime, but of every government and institution that has the power to intervene and chooses not to.
In Albania, the protesters are risking arrest, injury, and criminalization to make their voices heard. They're not doing this because it's easy or safe. They're doing it because they've concluded that the alternative, silent acceptance of a system that doesn't work for them, is worse. And in the Tesla case, a family endured years of legal battle against a corporation with virtually unlimited resources, because they believed that their loved one's death should not go unanswered.
These are stories about power and the people who challenge it. They are stories about systems that are supposed to serve the public and instead serve themselves. And they are stories about what happens when ordinary people decide that enough is enough. Tonight, we've tried to do justice to those stories, to go beyond the headlines and into the structures that produce them.
And that's what Truth Report is about. Not just telling you what happened, but helping you understand why it happened, who benefits, and what it means for the world you live in. Because the distance between Tehran and Tirana and Florida is shorter than you think. The same forces that sentence protesters to death are the same forces that corrode democratic institutions, are the same forces that allow corporations to profit from lethal technology. They are all expressions of power without accountability.
So what can you do? Stay informed. Demand transparency from your governments and your corporations. Support organizations like Amnesty International that document abuses the powerful would rather keep hidden. And remember that the people in these stories, every single one of them, started as individuals who decided that silence was no longer an option.
From all of us at Truth Report, thank you for watching. Thank you for caring. And thank you for refusing to look away. The world doesn't change because the powerful suddenly develop a conscience. It changes because the rest of us refuse to let them off the hook.
I'm Alex Truth.
And I'm Maya Clarity.
And this has been Truth Report. Good night, and keep asking questions.
The truth doesn't hide. It waits for someone brave enough to find it. We'll see you next time.